We are in a series. We are in a series today entitled Don't Rush. Don't rush. This idea of rest, of us really taking our time, of understanding what God meant for us when he mentioned rest, when he talked about the Sabbath. This series that we have been doing on Sunday and Wednesday, because we do not have to be in a hurry in life. We don't need to be in a hurry as a church. We don't have to be in a hurry personally or financially or otherwise. We need to re-embrace the idea, the command, the principle of Sabbath, and what God intended for us to glean from it when he instituted it, not in the Ten Commandments, but when he instituted it at creation. That one of the very first things he invited us into was rest. Are we ready for a word? Good. Stand and turn with me again to the gospel according to Mark. Mark, the second gospel listed in your New Testament. Mark chapter 2, and we'll read 6 verses, verses 23 through 28. Mark chapter 2. Amen. I know y'all got paper Bibles. God bless you. If you have it, say, I got it. If you need more time, it's on the wall. New International Version. If you have a different version, I promise it'll read all the same. It says this: One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? He answered, Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, here it is, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. He makes it better. He says, so the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. I want to tag this text with this title, Just Try It. It's good. It's good. You may be seated. Just try it. It's good. I grew up an extremely picky eater. I'm sorry for all of you who was with me in that season. And it didn't help that I had a sensitivity or have a sensitivity to dairy, and then discovered that I could not eat cheese at all. Now, here's the thing though. If I be real honest, I became increasingly picky the way many kids do, because I didn't like how some foods looked. I just didn't like how it looked. I didn't like the color. Didn't like how it was sitting on the plate. I didn't even like the look of the texture or how it was presented to me. And so if it didn't look good, I didn't think it was good. You'll catch it on the way home. If it didn't look the way I wanted it to look, if it didn't come packaged and presented the way that I would prefer for it to look, then I didn't want to touch it. The other issue, though, is that sometimes I was picky because my friends didn't eat it. And so if they didn't eat it, then I didn't eat it. Oh, okay. If they cut the ends off their bread, now I went home, I want the ends cut off my bread. If they don't like that candy, I don't like that candy. If they don't like that vegetable, I don't like that vegetable. In other words, I let their issue become my issue. I'm trying to help you early if you get it. I let their problem become my problem. I never had an issue with the food. I never had an issue with it. I never had a concern. But because it was your issue, I made it my issue. I was spending some time with my cousins in Joliet, Illinois. I'll never forget this. Anywhere between 8 and 10 years old in Joliet, Illinois. I was hanging out there. Were 5 of us in the home. At that time, we are all 2 years apart, so at least two of them were old enough to supervise whatever was happening in that house. We had slept in, got up late, and we needed some breakfast. We needed some breakfast, but they already knew that their little cousin is picky, and so I immediately asked for waffles. I want some waffles. They went in the freezer and had waffles, and then I heard some whispering going on in the kitchen. And I was like, hey, what's the problem? And so my cousin Siobhan, who did not care, was like, the only waffles we have are blueberry. We only have blueberry waffles. For me, that's nasty. I don't want no blueberry waffles. I eat home-style, regular schmegular Eggo waffles. She says this. She says, no problem, cousin. Watch what she says. We'll be happy to pick all of the blueberries out. Y'all already know she was lying. So I'm being dumb and naive. Sure, we go and play. They make bacon and all of that. And the Eggos, they put it down. They drench it in syrup. I'm not thinking anything of it. I began to eat those waffles, smash them. I asked for 2 more waffles. They happily put the waffles in there and put it on my plate. And I'm not even thinking that the time that they popped out the toaster to my plate, there's no way they could have put blueberries out of them waffles. It don't matter. By the time it hits me at 8, 9, 10 years old, I'm smashing them. And then all of a sudden, it hits me. And she looks at me and she says, you know, we didn't pull none of them blueberries out of them waffles. And you still ate it. And she said something I will never forget. Love you, Vine. She said, you're going to miss out on a lot of good stuff, unwilling to try anything. I suggest that so many of us have FOMO. We have the fear of missing out, that we keep thinking that if we don't keep working or keep going or keep looking or keep searching, that we're actually going to miss out when really we need to try rest. In our text, Jesus is correcting the Pharisees' idea of rest. He is giving perspective on what the Sabbath was really intended for, because they keep following him and they keep questioning everything. They question him on who had the authority to forgive sins. They question him then on eating with sinners. They question him on fasting, and now they're questioning him on the Sabbath, and that's just Mark chapter 2. And Jesus is like, say, fam, have you even really tried real Sabbath? He's like, have you ever really tried Sabbath? Mark writes this way because it is an invitation to his readers to try things the way Jesus offers them. Oh, I hope you hear me. That you don't need to try it the way you want to try it. You don't get to just do it the way you want to do it and then expect God to bless it the way you wanted him to bless it. No, somewhere are you willing to try what Jesus offers, Jesus's way. That we can't get caught up in how something looks or what other people think about it or their perception of it or their issue with it, but you got to participate in what Jesus calls you to do, and you got to try it his way. Just try it. Just try it. It's good. It's good. Here we go. A few things I want to share with you about rest today that I pray will help you. If you try it, first you find out that rest fills empty places. That rest will fill empty places. Verse 23 of the text says, one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields. And as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. It's the rest day, the text says, that it's the Sabbath. Jesus and his boys are walking through the field. They're walking through somebody else's grain field. Now, we're going to be much more practical the next 2 weeks. I want to help you. But here, let's pause for a second because I need you to see that Sabbath should always remind you to walk, not run. They didn't run through the grain field. They leisurely walked through this grain field, enjoying their time with Jesus. They are leisurely strolling through a grain field. Why? One, it's the Sabbath. So they know contextually they can't work anyway. But here it is, what I need you to understand, that they don't take their off day to sit down and plan their on day. They didn't sit down in the grain field and then just talk about what they needed to do the next day once they could work. No, they just spent time enjoying the presence of Jesus. They just leisurely strolled through the grain field. And when they walk with Jesus, they begin to pluck heads of grain from the field. Now, this is why it's so beautiful, because you need to understand that this grain field is not something that they have planted. And so they are just enjoying the scenery and the satisfaction even more than the sustenance. This is my point with this, that Jesus feels what is empty, but what is empty for them isn't their stomachs. This isn't about food. We talked about that last week. In this moment, Jesus feels their hearts and he feels their hands well more before he deals with their hunger. Because it's the Sabbath, so you need to understand the context of the text. They could have stayed at home on the Sabbath. They could have stayed in the temple where they were on the Sabbath. They could have stayed in the house where the paralytic was healed in Mark chapter 2, verse 1 on the Sabbath. But instead, they followed Jesus. Wherever Jesus went, that's where they wanted to be. If Jesus was going to be in the house, we're going to be in the house. If Jesus is going to be at the lunch table, we're going to be at the lunch table. If Jesus is going to stroll through the grain field, we're going to be with Jesus in the grain field. Why? Because they knew the best place to be is where Jesus is. I wish I had 5 people who knew that the best place for me to be is wherever the master is. Wherever Jesus is, that's where I want to be. So when they walk with Jesus, watch what happens. He provides for them what they could not provide on their own. The text is already an illusion of why that is true, y'all, because most of these jokers are not agrarian. Remember, Peter is a fisherman. He got a whole bunch of fishermen friends. Levi and Judas handle money. Jesus himself was a carpenter. None of them planted grain. And yet they're walking through a grain field in full bloom, in full harvest, and they are enjoying it. They were enjoying following Jesus, because what I do want you to get is that Sabbath is about pleasure just as much as it's about provision. Now, they may be snacking, but if they're snacking, then they're just like 10-year-olds and teenagers on spring break and Thanksgiving break, that they eating because it's available, not because they hungry. You got them kids and grandkids, eat up all your food. They not starving. They just want something to eat. You know they weren't starving, because the conversation immediately prior to this one is about fasting. The Pharisees and John's disciples were complaining that the disciples of Jesus weren't fasting. What does that tell us? They had just eaten. They weren't particularly hungry, but they were out there picking grain because they had the benefit of walking through the fields and enjoying the beauty and the bounty of a harvest they did not plant. They're enjoying the beauty and the bounty of a harvest they never worked for. They're enjoying the beauty and the bounty of a harvest they never sowed seed for. They're enjoying the beauty and the bounty of a harvest they did no work to get, because Jesus let them reap what they did not plant to fill what was empty. Because Jesus knows that when we follow him, that we live in this broken world, and what may be empty may not be your stomach, it may be your faith. For some of you, what's empty is not your stomach, it's your joy. For some of you, what's empty is not your stomach, it's your peace, or your creativity, or your fun. And when you're willing to walk with Jesus through a grain field and you get to see the scenery of how good he is, you find out he can fill your empty places. Let me see if I can make it plainer for you, because watch this. When they walk through the grain field, they get the scenery of what God can produce without them. Okay, let me slow it down. I need to make sure you get this. They aren't agrarian, Reverend Peel. They aren't agrarian. They don't tend to the ground. They're carpenters. They're stonemasons. They're fishermen. They're money handlers. They're not rabbis. This wasn't even their field, and yet they're walking through the field, and they get to see all of this beautiful grain that is plucked up, and they get to pick it. And then it becomes a moment that, man, grain is here, and we did nothing for it. That I'm walking with Jesus, and when I walk with Jesus, stuff pops up that I didn't work for. Okay. Jesus, in the beginning, was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. So that means in the beginning, God was there when the world was created, and he didn't need my help to create the world. So that means he don't need my help to fill my empty places. And the disciples get a reminder that Jesus is so good that when I follow him, even when I didn't do the work for it, God can show up and bless me anyhow. He can fill empty places because he is still the God that creates out of nothing. And when you rest in Jesus, when you're willing to take that day off and walk with him, he can fill your empty places. You can pause with his presence so he can fill you up. He fills empty places. Here it is. Here's the second thing that rest will do, is that rest, here we go, hope I help you, filters evil perspectives. Yeah, we want to talk about this. It filters evil perspectives. Verse 24 of the text, Mark 2:24 says, the Pharisees said to him, look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? Okay, wait. The Pharisees accused Jesus and the disciples of doing what is unlawful. They tried to tell them that they were breaking this law that they had become familiar with and accustomed to. And what they were accusing them of doing was harvesting. Okay? Harvesting would be considered work. Okay? And this is where they're pulling it from. Deuteronomy 23:25 says this, if you enter your neighbor's grain field, you may pick kernels with your hands, but you must not put a sickle to their standing grain. Well, as I read the text, they were picking kernels with their hands. There is no form of sickle or any instrument in their hand that would speak to harvesting. So Pharisees, how are you still calling Jesus out and the disciples out for doing what you really know they weren't doing to begin with? And the problem is because the Pharisees' perspective was evil. They accused them of doing wrong because they had an evil perspective. Here we go. Come here. The Pharisees had determined for themselves what was wrong. Here it is. They accused them of doing wrong first on their principles. They accused them of doing wrong on their principles. The Pharisees had determined for themselves what the law was for the Sabbath. This is what we would call Second Temple Judaism. They have returned from Babylon and Assyria. They have come back from exile, and now they have rebuilt the temple. They have been quiet for a while. This is during the time between Malachi and Matthew where the Pharisees pop up, and they made laws for the laws for the laws. This is why we have the mitzvah, the 613 laws. And the problem is, oh God, hold me up, they took the law into their own hands. They took the law into their own hands. They tried to make the law something that it wasn't. They took the law into their own hands, and then they tried to hold innocent people to the laws they created. And then they over-policed them in hopes to catch them and do away with them because they felt better than them. Can I talk to some people who wear uniforms and robes? Who, can you please stop manipulating the law into what you want it to be? Can you stop trying to make the law something that it's not and then unjustly hold innocent people to the law that you manipulated and the standards that you create, and then you want to over police us because you really just don't like us? And now you want to use your abuse of power for brutality and violence and genocide against people who don't look like you. Shame on you. I said what I said. Come back. The Pharisees had their own standard of the law. Sit up, star. Come here. Come here. Be careful then of living your life based on somebody else's standards. You got to be careful of living your life based on somebody else's principles, because maybe you often don't rest because you're moving at the pace of other people instead of the pace of his presence. This is why you tired, because you keeping up with everybody else's standards and everybody else's principles and everybody else's priorities. You know what grandmama said. You trying to keep up with the Joneses. Who are the Joneses, fam? The Pharisees have a standard of what it is to be law. And all the Lord ever said was do no ordinary work. And so many of us find ourselves in detriment because we are doing what they told us to do, whoever they are, and not what God told us to do. Now, let me not let you go off the deep end. I'm not talking about being unwilling to submit to authority. I'm not talking about not following what your job asked you to do. I'm not talking about not listening to wisdom or listening to your grandmother or even following your pastor. But I am concerned that when you can get caught up listening to people who have IG posts about their millions with no business track record. I do have a problem that you following everybody else and they have no track record proven of what they can actually do. You got to be careful of listening to somebody else's principles. But then the Pharisees also accused them of being wrong because they accused them based on their process. Their process. What do I mean? In other words, it was their idea of what they would be doing as work. So they knew, the problem is their own heart was jacked up, and they knew even plucking heads of grain for them, they would have been harvesting that grain. And so on one hand, church, you got to hear me, you got to have discernment around what others say. But you also need to be mindful that you don't get caught up in what others do. Don't put yourself in a category you don't belong to because you can end up in pain. Don't find yourself in a pattern or a process that'll actually get you in more trouble and it will never produce you any triumph. Okay. Y'all know I'm crazy. February 27th, 1994 was the most lopsided boxing match in history. It was because Thomas, the hitman Hearns, had a boxing match with Martin Raw Dog Payne. Martin Lawrence had an episode where he is a local radio personality and he has won one celebrity boxing match. He beat some fat, out-of-shape dude one time. He hired his own publicist. Dude had a belt, had a whole photography shoot, threw a whole party like he was a professional boxer. He started to follow the process of all of these professional boxers until a real boxer showed up. He threw a party for himself. Thomas Hearns pulls up to the party, flirting with his girl, and Martin says, "Hey, I ain't having it. I'll fight you." Bro, you tripping. I'll fight you. I just won the celebrity belt. Bro, you had one fight. I just won the celebrity belt. This is what I do. I talk to Sugar. You ain't hit, man. You the get hit, man. So the story goes that they show up in the ring and Martin is beat so bad. If you've seen the episode, dude is stuck to the wall. He is hit out of his shoes, stuck to the wall. And when he gets home, y'all, his head is swollen to the point that he is unrecognizable. It's knots all on his head, his forehead. Gina don't want to kiss him. She don't know who that is because him trying to think he was somebody he wasn't got him in pain. Come here, we playing, but come here. Is your life all swollen up because you've been following somebody else's process? Are your finances in knots because you want to do it your way, not God's way? Is your family able to recognize you because you swollen all up? You got pain now you didn't want or sign up for, but you've been following somebody else's process. You got to be careful, because this is what rest will do. That rest allows me to pause and perceive whose perspectives are evil. Because when I rest, I can pause and filter out who's trying to project their own lifestyle onto mine. Rest allows me to see if John is really for me or if they're just jealous of me. Rest allows me to see if Keisha really got my back or she's just riding my coattail. Do they really mean me any good, or are they just connected to me because I'm on my way up and they trying to follow? Rest helps you find out if you're really in the right position, or do I need to apply for something else? Because when we are in it, we don't often see our needs in it. When we're in it, our vision is cloudy, and rest gives you clarity. Pausing gives me perspective. Okay? It filters evil perspectives. Here it is. I also need you to rest, though, because rest feeds by unexpected power. Yeah, write that down. Take a picture. Rest feeds by unexpected power. Watch the text. Verse 25 and 26 says, he answered, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Jesus tries to check the Pharisees. He checks the Pharisees in this way. He checks them. He says, hold up. How you going to call me out on what we're doing on the Sabbath, as if you haven't read what David did with his men when he went into the temple and ate the consecrated bread? Some of y'all can't make it on Wednesdays. Let's do a little Bible study on a Sunday. This story about David is found in 1 Samuel chapter 21, verses 1 through 6. Don't go to sleep. Stay with me. David is on the run from Saul. He's got his men with him, and he runs to Nob, to the house of the priest. The priest would live on the outer room or an upper room in the temple. He pulls up to the temple and he runs into the priest. And the priest is scared when he sees David. Truth be told, David is scared when he sees the priest. Why? Here it is. One, because David is a mighty man of valor who has killed many enemies. And the priest don't want that smoke. So he doesn't know if David is there to kill him or to have a conversation with him. Two, though, there's a concern that if David is okay, does he think the priest is on his side, or is the priest on Saul's side? Because if he sends a messenger to Saul, I'm a dead man. Thirdly, the issue is Saul is an issue, period. Because the priest would be concerned that if Saul finds out that I had a conversation with David, he'll just assume I'm on David's side and he'll kill me. We got all of this tension in the text, but David shows up by himself and he shows up peacefully. Why? Because he wants some bread. He's hungry and he wants some bread for he and his men. But all that is available is the bread from the temple. Jesus says, you know that story. David is hungry. He needs food. But the only bread available is what they would call the show bread. The only bread available is the temple bread. The only bread available is the sacrificial bread. So the priest trying to work through this says, okay, David, this is what we're going to do. Are you guys clean? In other words, text says, have you been with any women? And David assures him, no, we ain't been outside. We clean. We clean. We haven't been doing anything. And the Bible says this in 1 Samuel 21:6. It'll be on the wall. Read it with me. So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, since there was no bread there except the bread of the presence that had been removed from before the Lord and replaced by hot bread on the day it was taken away. So the priest then decides, since you're clean and you're desperate, I'm going to give you this bread. And the priest gave him bread, here it is, that was in the presence of the Lord, but it had been replaced by hot bread. Sit up. I told you, don't go to sleep. It's about to get good. David got bread, but he got bread that was originally designated to honor God. David was able to eat, but what he ate from was bread that was designated for God and that could only be eaten by the priests. Okay, let me see if I can set it up because I want you to get this. That in other words, that the people would bring a grain offering or they would bring a bread offering, and then the Levites would make the bread, and then they would put the bread before the Lord, and then after the Lord got his sacrifice, then the priests would eat the bread, and then they would take that bread away, and they would put out hot, fresh bread. I'm going to say it again. The people would bring a grain offering, or they would bring bread. The Levites would make the bread. They would put that show bread before the Lord. Then, after the Lord got his portion, the priests would eat, and then they took it away to present hot, fresh bread. They took the bread away because it was no longer hot. They took the bread away because it was no longer fresh. Let me pause parenthetically, because even they knew you don't give God a cold, stale sacrifice. But even though they took the bread away because it was no longer hot, come close, it was still good bread. They brought the bread, show bread for God. Lord, get your curtain. That portion, they cut it, they burn it. The priests would eat, then they would take it away. So that means that people that David had never met gave bread to a place that was not David's home, that was designed for God, that David would never be. It was eaten by priests that David was not assigned to be, and yet he still ate. I need to rewind it because I don't think everybody got it. The people that David had never met, never knew, never called, never talked to, showed up and gave bread to a place that wasn't David's home, wasn't David's work, wasn't belonging to David. It was bread designed for God that David would never be, that David could never compare to. It was eaten by priests that David never was and that David never will be. And yet, after all of that, he still got food. I'll get happy by myself. He's on the run with nowhere to go. He's talking to a priest that's unsure if he will sell him out, and yet he still ate. Because holy bread became a human blessing. The bread was not designed for him. The bread was not made for him. The bread was not offered for him, and yet God still used that bread to feed him. The same way that grain wasn't disciples, that field wasn't the disciples, that grain still fed the disciples, because God has the authority to feed you in unexpected places. God has the authority to feed you by unexpected power. God has the authority to reclassify the provision and the process to take care of his people. That you didn't see it coming, but you stopped with Jesus long enough and trusted him long enough that you found out, and my God shall supply all of my needs according to his riches in glory, not according to my bank account, not according to the numbers, not according to my math skills, but according to his riches. Because this is what I found out, that God can make people who don't like you take care of you. There isn't a LinkedIn account good enough. There isn't an Instagram page wise enough. There isn't a professional office large enough to feed me the way God does. And rest will have you find out that you aren't smart enough. You don't have enough degrees. You don't have enough work experience to have it figured all out. But God can take a layoff notice and still feed you. God can take a mean supervisor and still feed you. God can take your felony and your prison time and still feed you. God can take your lateness, you know you was late, and he still fed you. Because God can feed by unexpected power. I'm done. Here we go. You ought to try it. It's good. Rest is good. Rest fills empty places. Rest filters evil perspectives. Rest feeds by unexpected power. And finally, rest is founded in eternal promise. Verse 27 says this, then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Rest then is a gift. God, hold me up. Rest is not only a gift, it is a gift of delight. I told you at the beginning, right? That rest isn't simply about provision. Rest is also about pleasure. That meant the Sabbath is to be a blessing, not a burden. It should not be an issue for you to rest. It should be a joy for you to rest. Here it is. Jesus' problem with the Pharisees was they had turned Sabbath into a burden. They had made Sabbath difficult. Remember, they had laws for the laws for the laws. They had a million rules. They had them crazy guys. Don't walk, don't touch. Don't look 5 seconds. Don't go, don't sit down, but don't stand. Don't lay down, but don't get up. They had made it difficult. Don't go, don't do. Luke records a story of Jesus and the Pharisees with the Sabbath so much that Jesus has to say, hold on, y'all. If your donkey falls into a hole on the Sabbath, you gonna leave him there? Surely you gonna pick up your donkey out that hole if it fall in a hole on a Sabbath. So you mean to tell me you care more about your animal than you do yourself? You mean you care about that animal more than you do people? Watch this. Too many of us have made rest difficult. You think maybe for some of you, you think rest is none of your worries exist. That ain't rest. You think rest is all your problems go away. That ain't necessarily rest. You think rest got to be a $5,000 vacation when it could be good scripture and a nap. Rest could be good word and a walk. Good rest could be popcorn and prayer with a movie on the side. It should be a delight. And not only is it a delight, but Jesus says this, hold me up, God, that he is Lord of the Sabbath. What does that mean? What does that mean? That means he designed it, he delivered it, he directed it, and he can diversify it. In other words, if Jesus created it, then Jesus can change it. Okay, you got to remember, Jesus is God. That means he was there when Sabbath was instituted. Okay, come close. We're my Wednesday crew. You got to remember, the Lord always designed for you to rest with him. That was always his intention. Remember, I told you last week that man was made on the 6th day. The Lord rests on the 7th day. That means man's first day with God was a rest day. Man's first day on this earth was resting in the presence of God. And the problem is we chose hustle over holiness. We chose wealth and wisdom over the wonder of his presence. We chose perversion and power and pain over the presence of God. God wanted us to rest in him. You got to understand that dominion and creation care wasn't going to be toil. You don't get the ground being hard until after they fall. That means God always considered your life to be restful and peaceful in his presence. Here's the problem though, we fail. Sin enters the world. Now rest has to become a commandment. It's got to become a commandment. They don't even obey the commandment. The Bible says one of the reasons they go to Babylon is because they wouldn't let the land rest. That covenant dies. Jesus comes to introduce a better covenant. And he says, my intention always was for you to rest. Why? Because I am Lord of the Sabbath. Trying to teach you. God, help me in here. Here's what he's saying. Jesus is saying, not only am I Lord of the Sabbath, I'm trying to help you understand that I am the Sabbath. You got to remember, rest is a person. Jesus is not only Lord of the Sabbath, Jesus is the Sabbath. That means Jesus is rest.
Wait, Jesus is the Sabbath, Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus is rest. He tells me to rest. Jesus is the Sabbath. He Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus tells me to enjoy the Sabbath. That means Jesus tells me to enjoy him. You're not getting it. Here was Jesus' problem, that they forgot what rest is. That rest is righteousness and goodness in the presence of God. And the issue with the Pharisees is they were more worried about grain and missing God. They were worried about the grain and missing God. Can I suggest that so many of us are caught up in grain and you're missing God? We're so worried about, do we have enough grain? Do you have enough grain on your job? Do you have enough grain in your bank account? Do you have enough grain in your relationships? Do you have enough grain for your body? Do you have enough grain in your family? And you are missing God. Because Jesus understood that rest is about delight. It's not about demand. It's not about doubt. It's about delight. Let me catch you again. Remember, rest is Jesus. Sabbath is Jesus. Then that means if I need Jesus, then what Sabbath really is a shadow of salvation. That rest is an illustration and a picture of salvation. Let me help you. Here it is. Because Sabbath is a pattern of rest. But here it is. Salvation is a promise of rest. Sabbath speaks to the eternal promise. It's about eternal delight, because you know that real rest is only the rest you find in Jesus. Okay, Houston Smith wrote a song this way. He said, when this life is over, we shall labor no more, but from toiling and care sweetly rest. I only find real rest in Jesus. Because when you rest, here it is, you participate in a preview to the promise. You could have kept playing. I'm done. Maybe y'all didn't get it. I'll try again Wednesday. I told you this. My daughter loves to ask for stuff. Loves to ask for stuff. We got a joint Christmas list. We got a note on the Christmas list. We get the updates in real time when she edits the Christmas list. A few days ago, though, I got a notification that said the Christmas list had been edited. Okay. I was a little irritated, and I said I wasn't going to check it. And Holy Spirit said, check the list. And so I go on the list, and something is missing from the list I remember. And so I finally talked to her. I said, babe, did you take something off of the list? And she said, yep, I did. And I said, you took something, you took something off of the list? I'm done. I said, yeah. She said, why? I said, why? She said, because I'll just get it from you later. I said, excuse me, the temerity, the unmitigated gall to just assume that whenever you ask for something, you just gonna get it from me like that. She said, yeah, I took it off the list for now because I just figure I'll get it later. Because here's what she knows about daddy, that Christmas isn't the only time that I bless her. Christmas isn't the only time that I take care of her. Christmas isn't the only time that I show up for her. And she understands I don't have to be in a rush to get everything all at once. I don't have to be in a rush to get it all in one day. Because here's what she understands. More is always coming. And I came to tell you, preach boy, that every time you pause, it is a reminder that trouble don't last always. Every time you rest, it is a reminder that there is a God who continually sees about his children. Every time you Sabbath, you tell God, I trust you now, and God, I trust you later. Every time you rest, you understand, God, I know that greater is still coming. God, I know that more is on the way. That every time you rest, You tell God, I trust you. I believe in you. Oh my, I wish I had some people in here who will go home today and take your shoes off and put your feet up and say, I still got bills, but I trust you. I still got problems, but I trust you. I still got pain, but I trust you. I still got worry, but I trust you. I still got heartache, but I trust you. Oh, I wish I had some people in here who could say, God, I trust you. Now unto him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that I ask or think. Now unto him that when I rest, I realize, God, you may not do it today. You may not do it tomorrow. You may not do it next week or next month or next year. You may even wait till you return. Here's the good news, you coming back though. And as long as I hold on to you, in your time, in your way, in the right season, in the right moment, the Lord will show up for you. That I ain't gotta force it. You ain't gotta push it. You ain't gotta make it happen. You ain't gotta do nothing extra. But your God will supply all of your needs. Your God will show up and take care of you. Your God will see about all that concerns you.